Hello, this is the Monday Agenda. The Monday Agenda today is delighted to look onto the 25 years since the establishment of Repoa. And with me on the program today is Professor Joseph Semboja, who is the former Executive Director of Repoa and the founder of Repoa, but as well as the former CEO of Uongozi Institute. You are very most welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you.
Maybe to start the Monday Agenda, share with us, share with our viewers your background, your experience, what brought about the existence of Repoa in Tanzania.
Well, first of all, let me clarify that I was not the founding executive director of Repoa. I was actually a founding member.
Okay.
I was in the technical advisory committee at that time. And there was no executive director at the time. There was a program director. Repoa started as a program. And the program director was Professor Agacho. Unfortunately, he passed away a year later, and then I was asked to take over leadership of the program at that time. And then after a while, it was changed into an institution with a full board and everybody else in terms of governance. And I became the first executive director.
Okay.
So that's the clarification I would like to make.
Appreciated. Yes. Correct.
A little history. Basically, the Repoa as a program was started in the mid-90s.
Okay.
And the idea was to fill in a gap which was noticed of lack of competent researchers. In the 80s and the early 90s, many graduates, whether masters and PhDs, who finished their training almost went straight into doing consultancies.
Okay.
There was a market for it. There was no market for research. And therefore, most people went into the consultancy business because there was no basically opportunity for building their career as researchers. And this was seen to be quite dangerous. So a discussion started about developing a research community. And it was not only within Tanzania, but also within Africa. That's when the African Capacity Building Foundation was established. Almost around the same time, ESRF was established, supported heavily by the African Capacity Building Foundation. And at the same time, Repoa was established with the support of the Dutch government. And all these efforts was, look, we need to build capacity of African researchers, of Tanzanian researchers, and so on.
Okay.
So this was really the background. We have lost that capacity. We're getting more and more into doing consultancies, and these are very different professions. So that was the justification for establishing
Repoa.
both Repoa and ESRI.
Okay, just thank you for that. Very, very well put. Just to understand, then we are talking about 25 plus years conception and starting up of Repoa. What were the challenges then you faced as an ED of Repoa, and how did you overcome them? You mentioned a couple. You mentioned the aspects of funding, and how did you overcome such challenges to, you know, being able today to celebrate 25 years of Repoa, before I even say we're celebrating or we're not celebrating the 25 years?
Well, the biggest challenge certainly was funding. At that time, certainly the Dutch had, pledged to support the institute during the first phase. And certainly they were very generous. You develop your research agenda, we fund it, right? And the agenda was developed by us, Tanzanians, and they funded 100% of it.
Okay.
Now, to some extent, it was good, useful, that you have somebody who comes and say, here is the money, tell me what you want to do and how you want to do it, but I will not interfere with what you are doing and how you are doing it. Now, it worked for the first round, or the first phase. And then, of course, the Dutch began to talk about sustainability.
Of course.
Yeah. How do you sustain the institution? Now, when you begin to talk about sustainability, and unfortunately that's the trend today, when funders begin to talk sustainability, they're actually telling you, begin to look for more resources from somewhere else. So that was then the period. The first phase was very good. Then we began to face the problem of diversification of funding.
Okay.
When you begin to face the problem of diversification of funding, first you have to convince other funders that the concept is right. The motive, your long-term agenda is right. But you begin to realize that it may not continue for too long before, the second round of funders begin to ask you to be independent. So we actually then began to talk about how do we sustain the institute. Not necessarily without development partners or outside partners, but how do we combine both local and foreign funding? So that discussion was then, I think, the turning point. And it came more or less at the time when we were approaching the end of the second phase of the Dutch funding. And we had to diversify because the Dutch basically pulled out. So that was the a major discussion. And remember, the first two phases, the focus was capacity building of researchers.
Okay.
Now, when you want to introduce local component into the funding, and either you go to the private sector or you go to the government. And it was very clear at that time that no money will come from both government and
private sector. Correct.
So the option was to begin to produce products that can actually sell to the government and hopefully to the private sector. That's then when we began to sort of make a slight shift from capacity building to a combination of building capacity of researchers to producing products that you can sell to policymakers.
Okay.
And there, you then have to combine experienced researchers and young researchers. Then you begin to see a shift. So in a way, the funding problem sort of created an opportunity or even forced an evolution into a combination of capacity building to one of capacity building and policy development. Sort of.
Okay, so that became like a gradual shift.
Yes.
Because of the funding constraints. Prof, my viewers would be very keen to get to know you better. If you look back in years, not necessarily during your days at Repoa, but uongozi, what is it that you look back with a big smile and say, yes, you know, this was my contribution. We did this for this country. Because I know most researchers are combined researchers. Different researchers come in, pull up resources and intellects towards something. But when my viewers, how do we say that's Professor Semboja in your work, in your 25 years at Repoa, off Repoa, when you're tenure at Repoa, or anything that you would really look back with a big smile?
Not as Semboja, but as Repoa,
Yes.
the Uongozi Institute. Because I don't think there is Semboja without Repoa, there is Semboja
Without
Uongozi
Uongozi,
Institute.
correct.
So I would like to, I think, first, if you look into the research community and many policy development experts, many of these actually sort of were mentored and groomed at Repoa. And that's an important contribution of Repoa. But I think there were a lot of other things, a lot of other policy developments, which one can actually say, yes. For example, the Vision 2025. Basically a significant contribution of Repoa or of ESRIF. In fact, the Secretariat was in ESRIF, but significant contributions from Repoa and Repoa researchers. Mkukuta. The Secretariat for Research and Policy for the development of Mkukuta and the implementation was actually sitting in Repoa.
Oh wow!
So significant contributions to policy development. So it's about development of research community and policy developers, but also significant contributions to policy documents and even monitoring of policy
implementation. Excellent. Prof, that's very well again explained. When you were one of the founding members of Repoa, you had the annual research workshops. And I must acknowledge, this is over 25 years. I'm sure they've evolved over time. So basically, if you can take us back in history, what was actually the objective and why the evolution to what they are right now?
As I said, you know, the basic objective of establishing Repoa at the time was to fill in a gap which was so apparent. Research community was diminishing. So what we were doing was researchers would apply, young researchers would apply for funding. We would then go through their proposal. We would give them advice on whatever to change. When they qualify, they would get funding. And then we would mentor them through the research process. And when they are done, they would then get an opportunity to present their results in a research workshop. Now, in that research workshop, you would then have researchers come and present their ideas, their findings, and so on.
Okay.
And there would be senior researchers sitting there to listen to them and to guide them. It was a mentoring, a serious mentoring process. So the annual research workshop started as an avenue or a platform for capacity building.
Okay.
That was the first, that was the idea of the annual research workshop as part of the process of capacity building for the researchers. Now, with time, as I already explained, when we began to look into influencing policy, not only for money making, but also research cannot be independent, not for its own sake. So, as part of capacity building also, you need to be able not only to undertake good research, but good research for a purpose. So then the annual research workshop began to look into the agenda of the users and to craft and draft the products to fit the users. So it's not only about capacity building, but it's also about users. So the Repoa Research Workshop then began to increasingly accommodate research results, which from research that was not entirely targeting capacity building. So you now have a combination. But I think with time, we moved more towards, you know, what do users want? And that then almost moved or shifted the research workshop to a policy dialogue. And that seems to me to be what we're having now. Yeah. So it is an evolution. Now, if you ask me, is it okay? It's not okay. I would say certainly this evolution would have come. But I think it's time to begin to ask, are we actually saying we are done with capacity building? My feeling is we actually did a good job in developing the current research community. I have no idea who is developing the future research community. And perhaps this is a discussion that needs to take place within research institutions, and specifically Repoa, whether actually we can begin to bring back the earlier agenda.
I'm trying, Prof, to think outside the box. Similarly to the very conclusion you've marked, that who is preparing the next research community? My viewers, I'm sure, would be very keen to understand what could be the risk. What could be the risk? Because I stand to be corrected, Prof, but probably use this platform to nurture me as well, that the government of Tanzania is not investing so much into research. If the government is not investing so much into research, is there a risk that the government should also probably pay so much attention towards nurturing, grooming, investing to next research community to address, maybe to highlight some of the challenges that the country is facing at the moment?
I think there's a commitment by the government to allocate a percentage of its budget for research. I have a feeling that there's a lot more attention to what I would call scientific. Is it science? Science.
Mm.
Perhaps, the social sciences research is probably not, has not been a focus yet. Perhaps it might be useful to begin to think about, an allocation into social sciences. I know there's a lot of money going into universities, and there certainly, an allocation perhaps goes to social sciences research. But I think it is an area that we may want to discuss. Institutions of research, particularly social sciences research, such as CSRF, Repoa, and others, it is important to begin to look into the next generation of researchers. I think the last, particularly years, mid-90s up to roughly mid-2000, substantial capacity building was done.
Okay.
And then, of course, as I said, then gradually we have moved into capacity building, not capacity building, but policy input as an important aspect, rather than capacity building only. I mean, obviously you can say you're building capacity for policy making, but in a way, if you do not have a mechanism to bring in new researchers, young researchers, and teaming them with the more experienced researchers to develop policy documents, research that aim to advise policies. The problem is you cannot force researchers to work together. You can only advocate and encourage experienced researchers to work with young researchers. Now, if you do not have a mechanism, in the past we did, because we would say an experienced researcher will not get funding if they don't work with young researchers.
Correct.
Now we are not enforcing it because the fund is not for capacity building. It is a fund for policy development. And therefore you don't necessarily want to push that direction because anyway, whoever gave you money didn't have that condition. So if we want to develop the next generation of researchers, there must be a specific fund.
Okay.
In which case we will be able to say this fund is accessible to experienced researchers only if they can accommodate young ones.
Okay.
And that is where the trick is. And I think that's where my problem is.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the same line, this is the Monday Agenda, and the Monday Agenda is talking to Professor Joseph Semboja, who is the former Executive Director of Repoa, but also the former CEO of Uongozi Institute. And we are highlighting, we are looking onto the 25 years of Repoa. And as a former ED of Repoa, there's a lot to tap onto his rich experience. And Prof, just to understand, taking you slightly back again in history, looking onto Repoa and the very final words you said, building synergies to as far as researchers are concerned. You referred to experienced researchers vis-a-vis the young researchers, young and upcoming. But I also wish to understand, Professor, what is the significance of building synergies to the like-minded organizations or institutions, the likes of ESRF working together with Repoa, or Repoa working together with Uongozi Institute, the the likes of academia, the University of Dar es Salaam. What is the significance of these networks, of these synergies, towards achieving whichever objective or goal they're in?
I think this is an important point. The relationships must be built. No single organization can claim to adequately address both capacity building of researchers and policy support to policy development by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Each institution has its own strengths,
Mm-hmm.
but each institution also has areas that it needs the support of others. Repoa has basically, if you look at Repoa in the last 25 years, it has built a good reputation as a research institution. Initially in building capacity of young researchers, but later also in undertaking research for policy development.
Correct.
And it's done very well. Recognized across Africa and probably globally. ESRF similarly has been more policy linked. As a matter of fact, ESRF was actually established basically as by an initiative that went through the government of Tanzania. And therefore, in that sense, one can say is a think tank of the government.
Correct.
So clearly, not as a capacity building institution, but as a policy development institution.
Okay.
Uongozi Institute, as an institute for supporting the capacity building of leaders, it has a very clear niche. Now, but these leaders, you need, in order to be able to build the capacity of leaders, you need research.
Correct.
You need knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this knowledge will come from either Uongozi itself, but more so from institutions that specialize in research development and so on. Uongozi seems to have a very strong niche in kind of bringing together leaders
Okay.
to discuss issues. And Repoa needs that avenue also, yeah, to use the strength of Repoa of Uongozi to convene high-level meetings. So that sort of synergy, that symbiotic relationship is extremely important.
It is.
It is important, and I say you cannot just say I will do everything. Uongozi Institute cannot do all the research. In fact, most of the research that Uongozi Institute does is outsourced, right? Most of the researchers that are used by Uongozi Institute come from Repoa, from the university, from USRI. So this is we're doing very well in that area. Yes.
You mentioned, Professor Semboja, in your explanation, the think tank. I used to hear think tank, especially during the third regime of His Excellency the late Mkapa. But after that, it has not been as loud as it used to be. Do we still have the think tank in Tanzania? And if we do, in your own experience, in your own wisdom, Professor Semboja, what is the significance? What is the importance of a think tank for a country?
Well, I think in all the phases, think tanks have been there.
Okay.
And think tanks have been doing their job.
Okay.
In doing research, in disseminating research, in advising governments, and so on. Sometimes they have not been called think tanks.
Okay.
Sometimes we, for example, Uongozi Institute calls itself sometimes a center for excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really not about, but certainly think tanks have been there and they have worked. Actually, for example, if you want Repoa, over the last 10 years, has developed as a very well-known think tank in Africa. Much more, it did gradually develop as a think tank known around Africa and the world when I was ED. But when Professor Wango was there, it actually, accelerated quite quickly into a very well-known think tank in Africa, linking very well with other think tanks in Africa and around the world. Mm-hmm. And the current ED has continued that. So the think tank term may not have been used. Okay. But these entities have actually, I would say, their contribution, their value as think tanks increased significantly over the last two, I would say,
decades.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm not really. I'm quite happy in my mind about how they have moved. My only concern is sustainability.
Correct.
Of these institutions, and you call them think tanks. And I think this is a discussion that we need to have internally.
Is this similar towards sustainability? Does it go hand in hand with the grooming the next generation of think tankers, or this is specifically on to ensuring that the vision continues?
I think think tanks, there's a lot of dynamism.
Okay.
The world is changing very fast, so you wouldn't expect, and the Repoa itself has shown this. That, you evolve by taking into account, the global context, the African context, and in fact the country context. So think tanks will evolve into their own, depending on how the world shapes them.
Okay.
But sustainability is about relevance of the concept. That's why think tanks evolve.
Okay.
You know, my feeling is that soon think tanks may have to begin to think the next generation of researchers.
Correct.
Because that element has not really been, especially in the social sciences, that element has been forgotten a little bit. So that part need to be, and the problem with that part is that it is a part which is seen as an investment of an industry which does not necessarily generate results immediately.
Immediately, correct.
And that therefore is almost so important that governments begin to look at these as public goods investments.
Okay.
Then I think there is this continuing generation of think tanks that, you know, have to ensure that it caters for a changing world.
Okay.
And society expectations are changing, you know, government expectations are changing, and they need input from these think tanks.
Okay.
So you need relevance of the think tank to whatever is needed at the moment. But you also need think tanks who actually realize that, you know, we need researchers in the next 20 years. And these experienced ones will not be there.
Correct.
So a combination of
Both.
both.
Okay. Prof, we have in Africa a challenge of grooming people, young people especially, towards, you know, taking over the roles that we have at the moment. And this is very vivid when it comes to politics. You know, you see a politician over and over time. I'm sure you've expressed it in so many ways, the importance, the significance of institutions like Repoa to look onto how they can re-strategize, ensuring that there's a next there's a next community or society of researchers. What do you, where do you think, rather, Prof, where do you think I wouldn't really wish to say we go wrong, but where do you think is the gap between grooming the young people and what actually should happen towards grooming them, so that, you know, as we go off, the likes of Professor Semboja, you mentioned earlier on that, you know, at this time you're still presenting papers. You would rather see someone else younger present papers, etc. Where's the gap, Prof?
I think the problem was, it's a repeating problem. I said in the 80s, the focus was, you know, we want to do consultancies because we want results very fast. So you actually bring in consultants from outside and use some of the local graduates to collect information, and the reports are written out there because the generation of researchers in Africa had disappeared. And we said, so we have a problem. So Repoa comes, SRF comes to solve that problem. And then for some time, we have solved it, and we said, now, you know, but this research, you cannot keep on building researchers by just doing research theoretical without feeding into policy making.
Correct.
So let's get to that point. And of course, gradually you begin to realize that the demand for good research policy work is so high that most of your people now begin to move in, and the resources moving into doing work for policy making and less for supporting the young generation to build their capacity. And now the Cambodians, you know, they are on the exit. But now we have a problem that we spend so much resources and time to do policy work.
Okay.
And forget to build the next generation of researchers. So we will have to do that now. And there must be a deliberate effort to do that. Now, this is the problem with human beings. You know, when you have a problem, you address it quickly and forget that there will be the next problem.
Correct.
And we have faced that problem. And soon, I think, we will have to begin. So where is the problem? The problem is we are human beings and we focus on immediate problems.
Okay.
And now I think the immediate problem will be the lack of capacity to undertake policy research.
Okay.
So I don't know whether we went wrong or we actually were overwhelmed by, you know, the demand for policy research and forgot that, you know, at some point there will be need to groom the young ones.
Correct.
The best combination would be grooming at the same time as you develop, you know, policy papers. But that requires funding which always allow for a combination or teamwork of the young and the old generation. And that is, I would say this is really a role that of public, you know, the public should actually simply say, we are allocating money to build the young generation, and the old generation can only get that money if they work with the young. But when they work with the young, they actually don't use them as research assistants, but as, you know, upcoming researchers, build their capacity, but also develop policy work. It takes a little bit more time to do that, but it is worth it.
Prof, this is the very last. Maybe you want to talk to the young people of Tanzania through Capital TV. You must, I'm sure, have a word or two to tell the young people in Tanzania. Karibu, Prof.
Well, I don't know whether that's my mandate, but I actually think that the most important thing is hard work and commitment and discipline. And now, I don't know whether it is allowed anymore, but in those old days, developing as a researcher required time to be in the library and in the office for as long as is required. Weekends, overnight, sometimes working until midnight. And I don't know whether the current culture allows for that. But if we actually do not allocate enough time, even when money is there, researcher is developing as a researcher is something that is long-term. It's a long-term investment, and it is not something that you see results in 5-10 years.
Right.
It's something that you see results after 15 years, 20 years. And I think we really need to understand that if you want to become a good researcher, you have to invest in capacity building for 15 years and more. And then you are happy, you'll get the results out of it. So investors, or rather funders, must understand this, but researchers must even understand this much more than everybody else.
With those words, I would really wish to, at this juncture, thank you so much, Professor Joseph Samboja, for coming into the Monday agenda, looking onto the 25 years of Repoa. But again, I stand to say that, you know, we celebrate 25 years of Repoa because of the hard work that you did put when you played the role as the founding member and then the executive director. And then the CEO of Uongozi. There's so much the Tanzania community, and especially the young generation, aspiring leaders like myself, are yet to learn, although you've mentioned the words that you're on the exit, but we still need to tap from you. So thank you so much for coming on to the Monday agenda. We wish Repoa a very good anniversary, 25 years, and congratulate you on the efforts, as I said earlier, that you put towards seeing an institution commemorating 25 years since its founding. And I'm happy, and thank you, my viewers, for watching the Monday agenda. Until next time, I'm your host, Austin Makani. Keep watching Capital TV.